frightened stranger walked into the brownstone this morning, and by nightfall, his secret had already turned deadly. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? And subscribe so you never miss upcoming mysteries. Nero Wolfe and the stranger in Archie's chair. I've walked into the brownstone office under a lot of questionable circumstances, once with a bullet crease in my hat, and once with a parrot screaming blue murder. But walking in at 7:55 that morning and finding a stranger planted squarely in my chair was, I admit, a new variety of insult. He wasn't just sitting. He was swivelling faintly, like a man trying to decide whether he preferred facing death head-on or catching it out of the corner of his eye. The chair fit him badly, too stiff in the shoulders, too fidgety in the fingers. My chair has opinions, and it clearly didn't approve of the visitor any more than I did. He wore a decent grey suit with a faint pinstripe, and the nervous, hunted look of an accountant who has just discovered arithmetic can be fatal. His hair was slicked but losing the war, and his eyes didn't rest anywhere for more than a second. If the fellow had been juggling grenades, he couldn't have looked jumpier. "Good morning," I said, dropping my hat onto the filing cabinet. "If you're auditioning for my job, we run a strict test. You have to type 90 words a minute, take dictation from a man who dislikes your very existence, and not get shot during office hours. You game?" The stranger jerked upright, gripping the arms of my chair like it was about to buck him off. "Mr. Goodwin, you're Mr. Goodwin." Unless someone forged the birth certificate. I walked around the desk, making a point of reclaiming personal ground. "And you are?" "Julian Renlow." He swallowed like the name had grown too big for his throat. I'm here to see Mr. Wolfe." "Congratulations. Lots of people spend years working up the courage. You skipped straight to my chair. Bold move." I leaned over slightly, studying the way he kept glancing at the door. "Are you expecting someone? The cavalry, the undertaker?" He sputtered. "I'm being followed." "Well, Manhattan offers a full menu of pursuers. Which variety is on your plate?" But he shook his head. His fingers worried the brim of his hat until it began to resemble a wilted flower. "I can't say. Not yet." I didn't push. Nervous men don't talk faster just because you apply grease, and from the look of him, one good shove would have sent him spiralling. I walked to my desk, nudged his knee so he'd vacate the chair, which he did with all the grace of a scolded schoolboy, and sat. "Mr. Renlow, Mr. Wolfe doesn't take appointments before breakfast unless you're willing to pay him in truffles, and even then, he'll accuse you of ruining his morning." He opened his mouth just as, at exactly 8 o'clock, the elevator groaned its familiar morning greeting. A moment later, Wolfe emerged into the office, full of the solemn dignity of a man approaching a throne room he already owns. He wore his brown and yellow robe, brows knit as if the universe had conspired to annoy him personally. "Archie," he began. "What in—" Then he saw Renlow. Wolfe froze like a boulder deciding whether to fall. His gaze travelled from Renlow's must suit to my reclaimed chair, and then to me. "Good heavens," he muttered, which translated from Wolfe meant, "You allow strangers to occupy your post? Are you ill?" Renlow lurched forward. "Mr. Wolfe, I'm sorry. I had to come. I had nowhere else." "Sit," Wolfe commanded, pointing not to my chair but to one of the yellow armchairs facing his desk. Renlow obeyed so fast he nearly overshot the target. Wolfe lowered himself into his own chair, placing his hands on its arms as if steadying the world. "Mr. Goodwin, your report." "He was in my seat," I said. "Aside from that, the details are still under construction." Wolfe's nostrils flared. "Mr. Renlow, explain your presence." Renlow rubbed his palms on his trouser legs. I'm an accountant at Barton & Phelps Publishing. I've discovered something dangerous, and now they're following me." "Who?" Wolfe demanded. "I can't," his voice cracked. "Not until I know which side you're on." Wolfe's eyebrows climbed in affront. "Sir, I'm on my own side. If your affairs intersect with justice or truth, that is incidental. But your timidity is not conducive to anything. Speak." I gave Renlow what I hoped was a reassuring nod, though judging by the way he winced, I probably looked like a dentist preparing an injection. He reached into his inner pocket and withdrew a small torn corner of thick paper, fancy stock, cream-coloured, with a printed border. He held it out like it might bite. I accepted it and handed it to Wolfe. "A manuscript contract," Wolfe murmured, rotating the fragment with thick fingers, "and a signature, or part of one." Renlow swallowed. Forged? I'm certain it's forged. The original contract is missing, and someone at the firm knows I saw the discrepancies. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. And this leads to pursuit? Yes. Last night someone tried to break into my apartment. They were quiet, but they weren't professionals. I escaped out the back stairwell. I didn't sleep. I came straight here. Why here? Wolfe asked. Renlo blinked rapidly. Because you're Nero Wolfe, and because I don't know who else to trust. Wolfe offered a small grunt. It wasn't flattery that moved him. It was the dusting of logic under Renlo's panic. But Wolfe disliked mysteries presented on an empty stomach, and his expression promised trouble for me, not our guest. Archie, he said sharply, is Mr. Renlo's story corroborated? Not unless you count his impression of a hunted rabbit. Wolfe's lips twitched. Unsatisfactory. Mr. Renlo, what specific element of this contract is fraudulent? I can't explain fully, Renlo whispered. Not without more proof. Please, I only need time. A day. 2. And protection. They're after me. They might be outside now. At that moment, he jerked upright, staring at the door with such intensity I wondered if he expected it to burst inward. Someone's there, he hissed. I crossed the room in 3 steps and swung the door open. The hallway was empty except for a faint draught and the scent of Fritz's morning coffee drifting up from the dining room. Either your ghost is polite enough to hide, I told him, or your nerves need a tune-up. But Renlo was shaking. No, I heard. Footsteps. I shouldn't have come. I have to go. Wolfe snapped. Sit down, sir. But Renlo was already scrambling to his feet, grabbing his hat like it was a shield. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have come. He backed toward the door, knocking into the umbrella stand, nearly sending Wolfe's walking stick clattering. Mr. Renlo, Wolfe thundered, but Renlo bolted, darting through the hall faster than I would have credited. I made to chase him, but Wolfe's bark snapped like a whip. Archie, stop! I stopped. Wolfe's finger stabbed the air. We know nothing of his circumstances. Pursuit may endanger him or you. Stay. I didn't love the order, but I returned to the office doorway, watching Renlo's silhouette vanish toward the vestibule. A moment later, the front door slammed, vibrating through the walnut panels. Well, I said, if that's his standard exit, I'd hate to see him leave a party early. Wolfe emitted a low, rumbled "Fui," his version of a muttered oath. He held up the torn contract fragment. A dab of evidence, nothing more. It's something, I said, if the man's telling the truth. Wolfe's gaze cut to me. Archie, you are at this moment considering following him. Only to make sure he doesn't fling himself under a taxi. No. Wolfe pressed the bell cord, summoning Fritz. You will not pursue him. Not yet. If he is in genuine peril, only a fool would rush unprepared. And if he is deceptive, you would be the fool he deceives. Nice to know you think I'm so irresistible, I said. His eyes softened. Barely. You are capable, Archie, and you are irreplaceable. Thus, I prefer you alive. I grinned. You're making me sentimental, sir. Don't, Wolfe grunted. It would be disagreeable. Fritz appeared at the doorway, immaculate as always, though he blinked once at seeing us so early in tension. Wolfe waved him away. Breakfast when ready, thank you. Renlo's contract scrap lay on the desk between us like a misplaced tombstone. I picked it up gently. Publishing firms, I said. I always knew those editors were up to no good. Wolfe shot me a look. Publishing is a world of egos and paper. Both tear easily. Maybe, I said. But something tells me Renlo's not tearing so easily. Wolfe groaned as he levered himself upright. I am going to the plant rooms. You will sit and make a complete memorandum of Mr. Renlo's statements. At your command. And Archie, he added, pausing at the elevator gate, you will not leave this house without my authorization. Of course, I said. A harmless lie, mostly. The elevator doors closed on Wolfe's massive silhouette and the faint scent of orchids waiting above. I sat at my desk, opened a fresh sheet of paper, and began typing, though my eyes kept drifting toward the door. Renlo had run like a man racing a shadow, and if that shadow was real, the day's trouble was just getting started. At 8:22, as I typed the last line of the memo, a faint thump sounded from the street, like a car door slammed too hard. I didn't go to the window. Not yet. Instead, I dipped my pen, wrote one last note and murmured, "All right, stranger, let's see where you've gone. If you've never started your morning by walking into a publishing house, consider yourself blessed." At 9:43 on the dot, I stepped through the revolving doors of Barton & Phelps on Madison and was greeted by a lobby polished so bright it could have doubled as a vanity mirror for the entire state of New York. When a place gleams that hard before 10 a.m., you know it's full of people who take themselves seriously enough to file paperwork about filing paperwork. A uniformed attendant with the posture of a man who'd elbow his own grandmother to preserve a rule directed me to the 6th floor. While the elevator crawled upward, I took a sniff, toner, ambition, and a hint of fresh coffee strong enough to power a small battleship. If Wolfe smelled this, he'd faint from the assault on his dignity. The 6th floor opened onto a beige corridor lined with framed book jackets arranged like portraits of aristocratic cousins. I followed the signs to editorial administration and found a reception desk guarded by a young woman with a headset, an immaculate manicure, and the smile of someone paid by the hour to endure authors. Her badge read Vera. She looked at me as if I'd arrived to complain about the choice of wallpaper. "I'm here to see Dorian Marsh," I said. "Archie Goodwin, personal representative of Nero Wolfe." That did the trick. Publishing people love a name drop, and Wolfe's has extra voltage. Within a minute, she ushered me into a glass-doored conference room with the kind of chair that makes you feel guilty for sitting in it. Dorian Marsh entered like a silver fox fresh from a grooming session. His suit probably cost more than Fritz's entire cutlery set. He offered a handshake that felt more like the brushing of petals. "Mr. Goodwin, quite unexpected. Barton & Phelps seldom requires the services of private inquiry." "Neither do most people," I said, "until someone dies, disappears, or double parks in the wrong alley. I'm looking into Julian Renlow." Marsh's face tightened exactly 1 millimeter. Julian. Unfortunate circumstance." He motioned to a seat. I sat. He perched on the edge of the table, an editor's way of performing intimacy while staying in command. Behind him came Miriam Fay, junior editor, small, sharp-eyed, hair pulled back tight enough to double as a restraining device. Next shuffled Halbert Quill, contracts manager, whose expression suggested chronic indigestion, physical, moral, or both. Finally, the door admitted Sylvia Dane. Sylvia Dane did not enter rooms so much as glide across their thresholds. Tall, elegant, flame-red lipstick, eyes that could melt ice if she bothered to try. One look at her, and you understood how she sold books. She probably made editors sign contracts just so they'd have an excuse to meet her again. "So," she said, sliding into a seat with practiced grace, "we're all suspects in something dreadful?" "That depends," I replied, "on how dreadful you're capable of being." Miriam smothered a laugh. That alone told me she was dangerous. People who laugh early usually weep later. Marsh laced his fingers. "Mr. Goodwin, Julian was a competent accountant with limited access. I assure you Barton & Phelps had no quarrel with him." "Except the forged contract," I said. That got their attention. Quill coughed. Sylvia's eyes sharpened. Miriam fiddled with her pencil. Marsh smiled thinly, the way a cobra might smile if cobras were literate. "Forgery is a strong word," Marsh said. "Publishing is full of transitions, drafts, red lines, revisions." "Sure," I said, "but most drafts don't get torn into convenient fragments and left on Nero Wolfe's desk at 8 o'clock in the morning." Sylvia leaned forward. "Julian went to Wolfe, that little mouse." Her tone was sympathetic, but her eyes weren't. "Mouse or not," I said, "he had a piece of a manuscript contract, and he thought someone was following him." Quill raised his hands as if protesting a speeding ticket. I had no quarrel with Renlow. If anything, he was careless with procedure. "There's a rumour," Sylvia said lightly, examining her nails, "that Julian had been dipping into petty cash. Hardly a scandal, more a nuisance. A red herring served with lipstick. I filed it accordingly." "Julian accessed confidential drafts," I said, "one of which happens to be missing, and someone thought it worth chasing him over." Miriam finally spoke, her voice quick and bright. "He printed something yesterday afternoon. I saw him use the restricted machine. He said it was routine." "What was it?" She bit her lip. "A contract, I think." Quill shifted in his chair. "Restricted printers are for final drafts. If he printed something without authorization, that's grounds for dismissal, not pursuit. I studied him. There was a tremor in his hands. Maybe caffeine, maybe guilt. With contract men, it's the same thing half the time. The door buzzed and Vera poked her head in. "Mr. Goodwin, you have a call from Mr. Wolfe." I excused myself and followed her to a side office. Wolfe's voice arrived smooth as chocolate and twice as heavy. "Archie?" "Yes, sir." "You are at Barton and Phelps." He didn't ask. He stated. Wolfe's statements usually carried the weight of a mild indictment. "I'm inquiring, as instructed." "I instructed nothing of the sort. I forbade you from freelance gallivanting." "Yet here I am, gallivanting freelance." A sigh, then the faint scrape of his chair. That was Wolfe's version of wringing his hands. "Exercise caution, and do not accept refreshments, they are likely inferior." "I'll try to survive without pastries." "Archie." "Yes?" "Do not permit yourself to be manoeuvred. If danger arises, retreat immediately." That was Wolfian affection wrapped in thorns. I felt warmer than the radiator. "Understood." I returned to the conference room where the quartet waited like a jury of literary sins. Marsh resumed the lead. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "Julian was not important enough to attract threats. If anything, he invited trouble through misjudgment. You know how these young men are, eager to prove themselves, meddling in matters above their station." "Above their station," I repeated. That's a phrase that sounds better in an opera than in a murder investigation. All four stiffened. "Murder?" Sylvia breathed. "I didn't say murder," I lied cheerfully. "I said investigation, but guilt travels faster when it wants to arrive early." Miriam's pencil snapped in her fingers. Quill dabbed his forehead with a handkerchief. "Look, Renlow was poking around ledgers he had no business touching. He asked me questions about royalty accounts. Innocent ones, but persistent. I thought maybe he was padding an embezzlement story, something small, pocket change stuff." It was a neat deflection. Too neat. "Did Renlow mention a forged signature?" I asked. The air tightened. Sylvia set her jaw. Marsh's eyes went cold. Marsh finally answered. "Signatures are often added late. Contractual matters are fluid." "Sure," I said. "Fluid enough to make a man run across Manhattan at dawn." Sylvia smiled with half her mouth. "You think one of us sent someone after him?" "I think someone wants a contract back, or doesn't want Nero Wolfe looking for it." Miriam leaned forward suddenly. "Julian asked me last week if I knew anything about an old contract, something from years ago. He was vague. I thought he was trying to sound important." I studied her. "Old contract for who?" She hesitated. "One of ours. Not me directly. A novelist we used to publish. Lawrence Wyke." Sylvia gave a small hiss. "Wyke? That ghost? Why dredge him up?" My internal radar pinged. Publishing ghosts and missing pages are kissing cousins. Quill interjected quickly. "Wyke hasn't been with us for years. Irrelevant. Red herring number 2 of the day." I stood. "Thank you for the hospitality and the dramatic pauses." Marsh rose too. "Mr. Goodwin, you should understand. Publishing is a delicate ecosystem. Rumours can destroy reputations. I advise you tread carefully." "That's my specialty. That and upsetting ecosystems." Sylvia's eyes glinted. "If Julian's in trouble, I hope you find him." I pocketed the tone, not the words. Sylvia meant something else. As I left, Marsh's voice followed me. "If Nero Wolfe wishes a formal statement, I will, of course, accommodate him." I turned in the doorway. "He'll ask when he wants it, and he'll want it when he's ready, which won't be today." Vera ushered me back to the elevators. "Is Julian all right?" she whispered. "Depends," I said. "Did he usually get followed?" Her eyes widened. "Followed? Oh no, but he did seem scared yesterday. He asked if anyone had been looking for him." "Did they?" "I don't know. He said someone might try." There was more fear in this building than the carpets admitted. Outside, noon sunlight hit me like a fresh interrogation. I checked the torn contract fragment Wolfe still had at the brownstone and wondered which polished liar upstairs had handled the original. At precisely 12:27, a cab honked at me as I stepped off the curb. I held up a hand and almost signalled it, but Wolfe's earlier warning stuck. Retreat when necessary. Instead, I turned up Madison. Behind me, someone shut a window quickly. Maybe coincidence, Maybe not. Either way, the next step was clear. Get home, get Wolfe's brain on the matter, and get Fritz's lunch before Wolfe's temper joined the missing contract. I quickened my pace. When publishing ghosts start rustling, it never means applause. The first thing I noticed when I stepped out of the cab onto Madison was the chorus of sirens ricocheting between skyscrapers like a flock of mechanical crows with indigestion. Sirens in Manhattan aren't rare enough to earn a diary entry, but when they're screaming right outside the building you were planning to visit again, and the building happens to house a publishing firm full of polished liars and nervous editors, they gain a certain personal flavour. I cut across the sidewalk, slipped under the police line before anyone could object, and made for the front entrance of Barton and Phelps. Inside, the lobby lights looked dimmer than they had that morning, which either meant the bulbs were dying or someone's pulse was. The superintendent, a squat, sweaty man who introduced himself as Hendricks, was pacing the floor like a man waiting for gallows instructions. When he spotted me, he rushed over. "You're the detective fellow," he panted. "The one from earlier. You'd better come down. They're in the archives." "Who's they?" I asked. "The grammar police?" "No jokes," he groaned. "Just come." He hustled me toward the service elevator. I stepped in and glanced at the floor indicator. It read Sub-Basement Archives in small brass letters. Lovely. Just the place for a cheerful afternoon stroll, a room full of dusty contracts and the ghosts of authors past. If publishing ever needed a mausoleum, this was it. The elevator groaned us down into a corridor lit by flickering bulbs that had given up on life around 1932. Hendricks led me past crates, boxes, and filing cabinets that looked older than Prohibition. At the far end, he paused at a metal door with a reinforced wire mesh window. "They broke in?" I asked. "No," he whispered. "That's the thing. The room was locked from the outside. I opened it. Then I called the cops." He fumbled with a keyring the size of a small planet and slid one of the keys into the lock. When the door swung open, the first cold breath of the archives washed over me, smelling of mould, toner, and trouble. Julian Renlow lay on the floor beside a stack of contract boxes. His suit jacket was wrinkled, his tie crooked, and his eyes fixed on a point somewhere above the afterlife ceiling. A slim, neat puncture in his ribs marked where the stiletto had entered. There was no blood spray, no drama, just an efficient thrust delivered by someone who understood both anatomy and speed. For a moment my throat tightened. I'd seen Renlow alive barely hours earlier, shaking like a leaf begging for a tree, and now he was a file in the wrong drawer. Footsteps thundered behind us. Pearlie Stebbins arrived first, broad as a barn and twice as subtle. He shoved past Hendricks, squatted beside the body, and grunted in recognition. "That's him," he muttered, "the accountant kid." Inspector Kramer followed a heartbeat later, cigar already clenched between his teeth like he'd been born chewing one. His hat was low, his coat was rumpled, and the lines at the corners of his eyes were carved with exhaustion, not anger. He looked at the body, then at me. "Well, Goodwin," he said, smoke curling out of the side of his mouth, "Wolfe's boy always shows up where the corpses are. Should I start billing you for psychic services?" "Make it reasonable," I said. "My boss doesn't like extravagance." Kramer snorted. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Following Renlow's trail," I said honestly, "though it looks like the trail stopped early." He crouched, inspected the stab wound, and blew out a slow breath. "Neat work. Professional. No struggle." He was nervous enough to faint at his shadow, I said. Fighting might not have been his strong suit. Kramer's eyes flicked up at me. Not hostile, just reading. "Tell me what happened this morning. Brief." So I did. I gave the account straight. Renlow in my chair, the fragment of the torn contract, his panic, his sudden exit. I left out only my personal assessment that the entire building was teeming with liars polishing their vocabularies. Kramer didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he rocked back on his heels. "So Wolfe had the contract piece," he said, "and Renlow came to him first." "Correct." "Then Wolfe's involved. Early. Damn." He stood. "All right. I'm not in the mood for a fight. For once, try to get him to cooperate." "That was almost polite," I said. "Don't push it." He jerked his head toward Stebbins. "Pearlie, get the access logs." Pearlie lumbered to a desk, rummaged through a ledger, and grunted. "Got something. Archives key was checked out last night." "By who?" Kramer barked. Stebbins squinted. "Says Renlow." I stared at him. Renlo? He was already dead last night. No way he signed out a key unless he developed a very cooperative ghost. Kramer took the ledger, read the timestamp, and swore softly. Somebody used his ID card. Which means someone had access to it, I said. Or to him. Don't get clever. He jabbed a thumb at the exit. Go call your boss, tell him he's officially needed, and tell him not to start pontificating about my procedural deficiencies. I'll word it delicately. He snorted. Yeah, do that. I stepped back into the corridor, dialed Wolfe from a wall phone that smelled faintly of old polish. The line clicked after one ring. Wolfe speaking. Archie. I found Renlo. There was a long pause, the kind Wolfe used when damming a dangerous surge of emotion. Alive? He asked quietly. No, sir. Another pause. Are you unharmed? Still vertical. Very well. His voice hardened. Return immediately, and bring no item except the fragment. Do not allow yourself to be detained. Kramer's already detaining the corpse, not me. Archie, Wolfe said with a softness he'd deny in court. Come home. Yes, sir. When I walked back into the archive room, Kramer's eyes tracked me. Wolfe want to play hero or hide in that greenhouse of his? He said he'd review the fragment, I replied, and that I should return. Good, Kramer grunted. Now get out of my crime scene. Always a pleasure, Inspector. Beat it. I didn't argue. Hendricks escorted me back to the elevator with the air of a man grateful for any removal of responsibility. As the doors rattled shut, I took one last look down the dim corridor. Barton and Phelps kept their secrets in tidy boxes, but they didn't seem to mind when bodies joined the filing system. Outside, traffic churned past like nothing had happened. I hailed a cab, climbed in, and gave the driver the brownstone address. While we cut through the noon rush, I went over the facts. Renlo dead, stabbed with surgical neatness, access logs tampered, someone using his ID after he'd already taken the big trip. At 12:58, the cab swung onto 35th Street. Wolfe's home rose like a silent fortress, leafy and smug. I paid the fare, took the steps 2 at a time, and pushed into the vestibule. Fritz was in the dining room setting out lunch, cold chicken, salad, rolls that could have posed for portraits. He saw my face and didn't ask a single question, which, in Fritz language, meant, please don't bleed on the parquet. Wolfe was in the office, seated behind his desk, like an ancient oak tree considering winter. He held the torn contract fragment between thumb and forefinger. Report, he said. I did, briefly. When I finished, a low, guttural growl escaped him, so rare and so volcanic that I blinked. Confound it. Yes, sir. Sit. I sat. He stared at the scrap as if trying to force the rest of the page to materialize. Someone, he said slowly, has arranged matters to provoke pursuit, and someone has arranged matters to mislead us. A red herring or two, I agreed. Publishing people love fictional bait. He shot me a glance. Do not trifle. A man is dead. I sobered. He tapped the fragment once on the desk. This is the hinge of the matter, Archie. All else is ancillary. Then we hinge forward. His eyes flicked up. In time, after lunch, and after orchids. Ritual restored, he tugged the bell cord for Fritz. I leaned back in my chair. Somewhere out there, someone had used Julian Renlo's name to open a door he never lived to see, and now that someone knew Nero Wolfe was holding a torn corner of their secret, which meant they'd be back for it. The next morning, when a woman summons you to her penthouse at 10 and the doorman greets you like you're expected, you immediately know one of two things is true. Either she's trouble, or she wants you to think she's trouble. In Sylvia Dane's case, I was prepared to hedge my bets. The elevator lifted me so smoothly toward the top floor that I half expected angels to board at the mezzanine. When it opened, a hallway of white marble and gold trim led me to a door wide enough to admit a small parade. I pressed the bell. A chime floated out, light, airy, pretentious, and then the door swung open to reveal Sylvia herself. She looked like the kind of woman who could turn a grocery list into a scandal. Her dark hair was coiled elegantly, her robe was silk the colour of a late rose, and her smile could have sold me insurance without a policy. Her penthouse made the robe look modest. Through the windows, Central Park sprawled below like a green and grey tapestry. I stepped inside, trying not to gape and succeeding only halfway. "Mr. Goodwin," she said in a voice soft enough to pet a lion. "How perfectly delicious of you to come." "I get called delicious so rarely," I said. "I almost wore a bow." She laughed, low and warm. "Champagne? Or do you detectives prefer whiskey at this hour?" "Coffee," I said. "Black. I'm working." "Oh, darling, we're always working," she sighed, sweeping toward a sideboard with an effortless glide. "Some of us just look better doing it." She handed me coffee in a porcelain cup so delicate I was afraid to insult it by holding it. She took champagne for herself, which at 10 in the morning told me either she was confident in her liver or very confident in her lies. "You came about poor Julian," she said, settling onto a velvet chaise like she'd been born lounging. "Terrible, terrible situation." "You knew him," I said, taking the chair across from her. "Of course. Everyone at Barton and Phelps knows everyone else's business. Publishing is a little village, with prettier stationery." "And what was Julian's role in your village?" "Accountant." She lifted her glass. "Numbers, dry things, not nearly as thrilling as fiction." "Renlow said he feared he'd be blamed for tampering with your newest contract." She didn't blink. "Ah, yes, the advance. Such a silly fuss." "6 figures is a silly fuss?" She smiled like a cat with a secret. "My dear, an advance is not a payment. It's a promise. Publishing runs on promises, some honest, some aspirational." "You think someone tampered with your contract?" "You tell me. You're the detective." I sipped my coffee. "Julian left us a torn corner of a manuscript contract. Someone's signature on it. Might be related, might not." Her laughter cracked, just slightly, a hairline fracture in a polished facade. "Julian always tried to be helpful. Too helpful. He had that air, didn't he? Like a boy who wants to please. He also thought someone was following him." She swirled her champagne. "That sounds dramatic enough to be one of my stories, but I suppose even dull accountants have their melodramas." She was lying, not badly, but just enough that the scent of it drifted through the room. "So," I said lightly, "is it possible someone wanted Julian out of the way to keep attention off your contract?" She sat up straighter. "I don't like the implication." "You haven't heard it yet?" She set her glass down with a click. "Julian was frightened last week. He told me someone in the office was sabotaging things, but he wouldn't say who." That wasn't in the summary she'd implied earlier. "Why didn't you tell me that 5 minutes ago?" "Because I wasn't sure whether to trust you," she said simply. "You're charming, Mr. Goodwin, but so are most snakes." I grinned. "Flattery." She rose suddenly and crossed to a lacquered writing desk. The desk gleamed like an altar to vanity. On it lay papers, letters, and one very expensive fountain pen, its nib crusted with red ink. I knew that brand, Marquis and Sons, used in the trade for signature verification because it left crisp, dyed lines the accountant swore by. "Broken pen?" I asked. She glanced down. "Oh, that? Yes." The nib snapped. "Dreadful contraption. I should throw it out." She picked it up carelessly. Red ink smeared her fingertips. She wiped them on a tissue. "Mind if I take a look?" I asked, already standing. She hesitated half a breath too long before handing it to me. "By all means. Inspect my broken toy." I examined the nib. It wasn't snapped. It was forced, angled as if someone had jammed it into something that resisted. Like, for example, the hard signature block of a contract that wasn't meant to be signed. I turned it in the light. "You use red ink to sign things," I said. "Artists love dramatic colours." "Accountants don't." "You're suggesting I forged something?" Her tone was teasing, but her eyes weren't. "I'm suggesting someone did," I replied, handing it back. "And that pen of yours looks like it had a long night." She drew in a slow breath, composing herself. Then she executed a perfect deflection. "Between us, the rivalry between Marsh and Halbert Quill has reached a point where one of them is bound to combust. Perhaps Julian walked into the wrong office at the wrong moment." "A feud?" "Oh, yes." She perched on the edge of the desk. "Dorian Marsh believes he runs the authors. Halbert insists it's contracts that matter. They've been snapping at each other for months. Julian mixed with both departments. Poor dear. He probably got caught between jaws." A tidy direction for suspicion, just a bit too tidy. I filed it under red herring number 3. Sylvia sighed delicately and moved to the window overlooking Central Park. The wind ruffled her hair. "You know, Mr. Goodwin, Julian confided something to me once, quietly, afraid someone might hear. He said he'd found an anomaly in a contract. My contract, he believed. But then he got it in his head someone else would be blamed. He wanted to protect them." "Who?" She lifted one shoulder. "He didn't say, but he looked guilty." He was scared enough to run to Wolfe. She glanced back, curiosity sharpening her expression. "Why, Wolfe?" "Because when you want the truth, you go to a man who hates waste, and murder is the biggest waste of all." "Poetic," she murmured. "But I doubt your employer appreciates poetry." "Depends on the meter," I said. My pocket buzzed. Wolfe. I excused myself to a corner of the room and answered. "Archie," Wolfe said. "Report." "I'm in Sylvia Dane's penthouse. She's full of charm and half-truths." "Authors," he said with distaste. "Emotional provocateurs with ink-stained egos." "Funny. She said editors were the ones with egos." He grunted. "A pox on all of them. Is she attempting seduction?" "Maybe. She offered champagne." "Decline all libations," he snapped. "If she attempts seduction, keep your wits. If she attempts deception, keep your distance." "You're very protective." "You're easily distracted by pretty faces," he said. "And she, though an artist, is still a specimen of our species. Opportunistic." "You say that with affection." "I say it with accuracy. Do not linger unnecessarily. And Archie." "Yes?" "Do not reveal the fragment unless absolutely required." "Understood." I hung up and turned to find Sylvia watching me like a detective novel heroine catching a plot twist. "Mr. Wolfe disapproves of me?" she asked, amused. "He disapproves of most things." "I'd adore meeting him." "That's unlikely," I said. "He doesn't travel well." She stepped closer, close enough that her perfume, a blend of lilies and wealth, settled around us. "Mr. Goodwin, if I tell you something in confidence, would it remain between us?" "That depends whether it's a confession or gossip." Her smile dimmed. Julian wasn't just afraid of being blamed. He thought someone might remove him permanently. "Why?" Her gaze flicked toward the writing desk. "Because he'd seen something on a contract, something no one was meant to see." "That's vague enough to be suspicious." "That's all I know." "Did he come to you the night before he died?" She froze. "Ah, a hit." She recovered quickly, too quickly. "He phoned," she said, briefly, panicked. "He said he'd found what he was looking for, and that he was going to someone who could help." "Nero Wolfe." "I suppose." She looked troubled. "I never should have let him get involved." "What exactly did he find?" Her lips tightened. "Something about a signature, but he hung up before I could press." "And now he's dead," I said softly. We stood there, the silence thicker than the carpet. I decided to shift the tempo. "Do you trust Marshall Quill?" I asked. "Trust?" She laughed bitterly. "Trust is for debut novelists. Marsh is brilliant but vain. Quill is loyal but weak. Neither man murders, not personally. But publishing has ways of burying the inconvenient." "In archives." She didn't smile. I checked my watch. It was 11:52. Orchid hours would begin soon, and if I didn't return before Wolfe ascended to the plant rooms, he'd stew for the rest of the day like an overstuffed casserole. "One last question," I said. "Why keep the pen hidden?" "It's broken," she insisted. "No, it's guilty." Her eyes hardened. "Mr. Goodwin, I don't enjoy being interrogated in my own home." "I don't enjoy dead accountants." "Touché." I set my cup down. "Thank you for the coffee." "Come again any time," she purred. "Not without a warrant or flowers," I said. She laughed, but that fracture in her voice returned. Outside her penthouse, the elevator descended with a soft, mechanical sigh, as if it, too, pitied Julian Renlow. In the lobby, I stepped out into the bustle of Central Park West. A gust of wind stung my eyes. My pocket vibrated. A message from Wolfe. Brief, impatient. Return. I headed for a cab, replaying Sylvia's expressions, her inflections, the broken pen, the rivalry she dangled like a lure. Somewhere in her penthouse lay a truth sharp enough to cut paper, and maybe flesh. As the cab pulled away, I couldn't shake the feeling I'd left behind more than coffee cups and polite lies. Something in that penthouse was watching its own reflection and waiting to pounce. If there is a sound more comforting than the front door of the brownstone clicking shut behind me, I haven't heard it yet, unless you count Wolfe's sigh of relief when Fritz brings in a roast goose. When I walked in after my visit to Sylvia Dane, the office was quiet except for the faint clack of Wolfe turning a page in the hefty dictionary he pretended not to use. I checked my watch. 12:58. Lunch in 2 minutes. A narrow escape. Before I could announce myself, the doorbell rang. Fritz appeared at the dining room threshold, gave me a knowing look I didn't deserve, and vanished. A moment later he returned, ushering in Saul Panzer. If you've never met Saul Panzer, imagine a man who could walk through a crowded restaurant without being noticed until he wanted the salt. His flat cap was pulled low, his jacket was nondescript, and his eyes took in everything except compliments. "Archie," he said mildly, "you look like you've been dancing with a furnace." "Sylvia Dane's penthouse," I replied. There was champagne. "That explains it." "Careful," I said. "Flattery like that will put wrinkles on your neutrality." Wolfe lifted his gaze from the dictionary. "Mr. Panzer, you are welcome." Coming from Wolfe, that counted as rolling out a red carpet. "Lunch will be served within moments. Archie, report." So I did. Sylvia's charm offensive, her cracked laugh, the broken red ink pen that hadn't broken anything except my patience, and the marsh quill feud she'd dangled like a ribbon before a kitten. Wolfe listened with his usual mix of disdain and concentration. When I finished, he grunted. "Phooey, authors." Saul cracked a soft smile. "That bad?" "Worse," Wolfe declared. "If incendiary egos could be harnessed, publishing houses could power the city." Before Saul could reply, Fritz's silhouette appeared in the doorway. Immaculate posture, immaculate timing. "Lunch is served." Wolfe rose like a ship dislodged from a harbour. "Come," he said, "we shall discuss facts over sustenance. I refuse to let homicide destroy my digestion." Saul and I followed him to the dining room. Fritz had prepared cold poached chicken with fresh dill, crisp greens, and rolls that could have made saints swear gratitude. Wolfe ate in silence, as he always did before speaking about a case. Saul respected that ritual. I pretended to. When Wolfe finally dabbed his mouth with a napkin and leaned back, the discussion resumed. "Mr. Panzer," Wolfe said, "I require verification of several matters: timelines, call logs, entry and exit records within Barton and Phelps. You are to pursue these with the usual discretion." "Understood," Saul said. "You want the truth or the official truth first?" "The truth," Wolfe replied. "The official will follow reluctantly." I threw in a wisecrack. "Saul, maybe you can also discover why publishing firms smell like disappointed dreams." "That's simple," Saul said. "They're full of editors." Wolfe actually snorted, a rare brief burst of mirth, and that told me the universe still had surprises left. But the levity didn't last long. Back in the office at 1:42, Wolfe gave Saul the fragment from Renlo. "You will begin with this. Determine its provenance. Which printer, which typist, which draft cycle." Saul slid it into an envelope. "I'll check the print logs. Contracts that use this paper have a specific chain." Wolfe's brow twitched. "Specific, but not inviolate." Saul nodded. "Right." As he left, I followed him to the vestibule. Saul pulled on his flat cap. "Archie, be careful." "That seems to be today's refrain," I said. "Why are you joining the chorus?" "Because people who forge contracts don't usually stop at ink. And the kid, Renlo, he wasn't the type to stir trouble unless he found something real." "I know," I said quietly. "He died scared." Saul's eyes softened. "Call me if anything shakes loose." He stepped out. I turned back toward the office and the phone rang. "Goodwin." "Saul," he said, "I didn't get far." That was quick. I hit a record clerk who owed me a favour. "Archie, that contract Julian printed yesterday. I know what it was." "Sylvia's contract?" "No," he said. "Something else entirely. A rights agreement from 5 years ago, for Lawrence Wyke." I stopped breathing for a second. The missing author? Yep, the ghost, the one who vanished without a trace. I felt a chill slither across the back of my neck. What was Julian doing with Wyke's contract? That's the million-dollar question. or considering the publishing industry, the $50 question. Thanks, I said. Report again when you have more. I hung up, walked into the office and relayed the discovery. Wolfe's reaction was a slow, tight narrowing of the eyes. Lawrence Wyke, he said, a man who disappeared, a manuscript that vanished, and now a contract reappears in fragmentary form. He leaned back. We have entered the domain of ghosts. And somebody killed Renlo to keep that ghost buried. Archie, Wolfe warned, do not leap. I don't leap. I hop gracefully. He ignored me. We must proceed systematically. He was cut off by the telephone shrilling again. I grabbed it. Goodwin speaking? Static crackled. Then a tense voice. Archie, Quill is dead. Who is this? Hendricks, the superintendent. They found him, Mr. Quill, in his office. They think he... Oh, God. The line cut. I stared at the receiver a long moment before replacing it. Wolfe, I said finally, we need to go. He glared. I do not go. That's not what I meant. I need to go. He opened his mouth to object, then closed it. The office clock read 2:03. Orchid hours were a long way off. That gave me permission. Go, Wolfe said curtly. But you will not go alone. I will call Saul back to accompany you. No need, I said, reaching for my coat. I'm not a porcelain figurine. Archie. His tone carried steel wrapped in velvet. A man has already died in that building. I will not have you walking into a second corpse alone. He rarely played the father card, but when he did, it stuck. Fine. Saul it is. 5 minutes later, Saul pulled up in a battered sedan. We sped to Barton and Phelps. A knot of officers gathered near the front door. Hendricks flagged us down. In here, he said, leading us past the reception desk down a corridor I hadn't visited earlier. He stopped outside Quill's office. The stench of spilled ink hit first. Inside, Halbert Quill slumped over his desk, face on his forearm. A pot of red ink lay tipped beside his hand, staining the papers like a macabre waterfall. Someone had staged it to look like a suicide. Pen in his fingers, ink on his sleeve. But the slackness of his posture was wrong. His neck was too relaxed for a man who had supposedly leaned forward to write his final lament. And the red ink, too bright, too theatrical. Inspector Kramer stood in the corner, arms crossed. When he spotted me, he didn't bark. He just exhaled smoke. Goodwin. Inspector. He jerked his head toward the body. You don't think suicide either. Not unless Quill liked dramatics, I said. And he didn't. Kramer nodded once. Closed the door, pearly. Stebbins obliged with a grunt. Kramer spoke in a low tone. I'm telling you this because Wolfe's already involved and I don't want a circus. Quill was dead at least an hour before anyone found him. No forced entry, no struggle. The ink pot was placed there afterward. We found something else. He handed me a small object wrapped in a cloth, a metal key with a number etched into it. Hidden drawer key, I said. Yeah, and inside the drawer, photostats, old contracts, including one signed by Lawrence Wyke. Saul whistled softly. Kramer continued. Someone was transferring Wyke's rights, forging signatures, moving stuff quietly from author to publisher to, who knows, and Renlo stumbled on it. And Quill? I asked. He either helped or threatened to expose it, and somebody shut him up. Kramer leaned in. Goodwin, tell Wolfe we need his analysis, privately. The word carried weight, respectful if grudging. I nodded. I'll tell him. And Goodwin, he added softer, be careful. That was the closest thing to affection Kramer ever offered. Back in the corridor, Saul murmured, 2 bodies tied to one dead author. And 1 torn contract, I said. The ghost is getting noisier. We drove back to the brownstone. Wolfe was waiting in the office, a book closed on his finger. When he saw Saul's expression, he set it aside. Well? Wolfe asked. I delivered the news. The ink-stage suicide, the hidden drawer, the photostats, the Wyke contract. Wolfe listened without moving a single muscle except his eyebrows. When I finished, he growled, deep, resonant, volcanic. Confound them! He slapped the desk. That alone confirmed how serious it was. Then he turned to me. Archie, you will not return to that building without Mr. Panzer. Understood? Understood, I said, and you will not pursue any suspect alone. Yes, sir. Wolfe exhaled heavily. This is no longer forgery. It is murder built upon murder. Yes, I said. And ghosts. He glared. Archie, do not anthropomorphize. Fine. One ghost. Singular. At that moment, Fritz appeared at the doorway. Gentlemen, coffee? Wolfe waved him in. As Fritz set the tray down, Wolfe closed his eyes briefly, as though centering himself before a storm. Then he opened them. Archie, tonight we begin correcting a very old injustice. I smiled. A ghost hunt? A truth hunt, Wolfe corrected sternly. Ghosts do not matter, but their contracts do. If you want to understand the soul of an editor, don't read their books. Look at their office. At 3:41 that afternoon, I stepped into Dorian Marsh's sanctum on the 6th floor of Barton & Phelps and immediately knew I'd entered a place where truth came second to aesthetics. His carpet was plush enough to drown an honest confession, his desk gleamed like a polished lie, and the man himself sat behind it with the posture of a conductor waiting for the orchestra to remember who paid them. Marsh glanced up from a stack of papers, his silver hair perfect enough to shame a mirror. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, voice as smooth as a forged signature, "I must say your persistence is robust." "Thanks," I replied, taking the chair without waiting to be asked. "My dentist says the same thing when I don't pay the bill." He didn't laugh. Editors seldom do unless it's at an author's expense. "You're here about Julian," Marsh said, folding his hands in a steeple that looked far too practiced. "And poor Halbert. Tragic." "Tragic is one word," I said. "Convenient is another." His eyes chilled a degree. "Are you implying something?" "Not implying," I said. "Investigating." He gestured elegantly. "Then investigate. But do try not to disturb the staff. Authors are skittish creatures. Editors must cultivate calm." He said it like he cultivated egos the way gardeners prune thorns. I scanned the office. Neat shelves, tidy manuscripts, 2 framed awards, and on his desk, a faint circular stain, barely visible but there. The exact size of the chilled beer glass Wolfe uses. The shape was unmistakable. Wolfe's brand of coaster leaves a ring you could identify blindfolded. Interesting. Very interesting. "You keep your desk immaculate," I said casually. "Except for that." His brow ticked. "What?" "Oh, a stain. Condensation from a glass." "You entertain often?" "Occasionally." His tone cooled further. "Is that relevant?" "Oh, absolutely," I said. "It tells me you were at the brownstone recently." Marsh's pupils tightened like camera shutters. "That's absurd." "That's Wolfe's ring pattern," I said. "I've wiped enough of his glasses to recognize it." His jaw tightened. "If you insist on inventing fantasies—" "Trust me, I don't invent. If I did, I'd write books and get advances big enough to buy rugs like yours." He stood. "Mr. Goodwin, you have 3 minutes to ask relevant questions." "Fine," I said. "Start with this. Why tell people Renlow and Quill were conspiring to sell rights? That's quite a plot twist." Marsh sat again, hands returning to their steeple. "Because it is the truth. They handled contracts together. Renlow was inexperienced, Quill was morally flexible. They likely found a way to profit." "Funny," I said. "Renlow didn't look like a man who wanted profit. He looked like a man who wanted to live long enough to apologize for something." Marsh's lips twitched, the smile razor-thin. "You are romanticizing. Fraud is mundane." "Maybe," I said, "but murder isn't." He flinched, just enough to catch if you were watching closely. I leaned back. "Let's try a different angle. Renlow printed a contract the day before he died. Not your department, but you know everything that moves through this office. What was it?" "A draft," Marsh said instantly. Too instantly. "Probably Sylvia Dane's new agreement." "That line's outdated," I said. "Try again." He frowned. "Mr. Goodwin, let me help. It was Lawrence Wyke's contract, a ghost deal. Care to explain why a vanished author's paperwork popped up the day Renlow panicked?" Marsh went very still. Stillness can be fear or calculation. In editors, it's usually the latter. "That," he said slowly, "is an old matter. A dead matter." "Everything dead is suddenly alive in your building," I said, "so forgive me if I don't buy that." He stood again, restless now. Wyke left without warning years ago. His rights reverted. Whatever Julian stumbled on was his own misunderstanding. "Or your mess," I said softly. His face hardened. "You're treading dangerously close to defamation, Mr. Goodwin." "That's what shoes are for." Before he could throw me out, there was a soft knock at the door. Miriam Fay entered, her expression bright and brittle. She clutched a stack of manuscripts like a shield. "Oh," she said, noticing me. "Am I interrupting?" "Not at all," Marsh said tightly. Miriam stepped in, her eyes darting between us. I heard Mr. Goodwin was back. People talk." "Let them," I said. "I'm harmless unless someone lies to me." She gave a nervous laugh. "You should talk to Sylvia. She and Julian were close." Marsh shot her a sharp glare. "Miriam." "What?" she protested too quickly. "It's true. She toyed with him. Everyone knew." I raised an eyebrow. "That so?" "Oh yes," she said, warming to her performance. "She used him, manipulated him, told him things. Julian was smitten. She probably drove him into trouble." Her tone was rehearsed, polished, which meant someone had fed her that line, a red herring with lipstick. Marsh snapped, "Enough!" She wilted instantly, like a manuscript meeting its rejection letter. I leaned forward. "Miriam, did Julian tell you anything? Anything real, not gossip?" She swallowed. "He asked one question, about an old contract, for Wyke. I told him I didn't know anything." Her voice trembled. "But I do know. He was scared of someone." "Who?" She hesitated, too long. Then, "Sylvia." Another lie. I could smell it. "Thank you," I said. Marsh marched to the door and opened it pointedly. "This meeting is over." "Not yet," I said. "One more question, Marsh." He paused, jaw clenched. "Why lie about visiting Wolfe?" His eyes flashed. "I did no such thing." "I have a ring stain that says otherwise. Wolfe's beer isn't exactly standard fare." He stiffened. "I met Mr. Wolfe once, briefly, months ago." "And you cleaned your desk only this morning?" I asked. His silence was the wrong kind, an absence, not a refusal. I stepped toward him. "You're hiding something, and whatever it is, it's big enough that Julian died and Quill died, and next in line is whoever's been forging signatures like a parlor trick." Marsh's face reddened. "You have no idea what you're meddling with." "You're right," I said. "So enlighten me." He didn't. I walked out. Before I reached the elevator, my pocket buzzed. Wolfe. "Archie," he said, annoyed and tight. "Desist your provocations." "Well, that depends," I said. "Do you mean stop provoking Marsh or stop breathing?" "Both, if necessary." "I'm collecting information." "You are collecting danger," he snapped, "and I require your presence, immediately." That tone, soft beneath the bark, protective under the growl, was one I'd only heard a handful of times. "I'm fine," I said. "So far," Wolfe retorted. "Return at once." "On my way." I hung up, stepped into the elevator and hit the button. The doors closed, humming like a secret being sealed. When I reached the lobby, Miriam Fay stood near the receptionist's desk, wringing her hands. "Mr. Goodwin," she whispered, "be careful." "Of Marsh?" I asked. She shook her head. "Of all of them." Before I could press further, she fled down the hall like a frightened stenographer in a thriller. I stepped outside into the late afternoon glare. A cab stopped. I climbed in and gave the brownstone address. During the ride, I replayed the office scene. Marsh's defensiveness, the stain on his desk, Miriam's coached accusation. The whole building reeked of performance. Publishing houses always did, but this one felt like a dress rehearsal for murder. When I reached the brownstone, I found Wolfe in the office, glowering at the torn contract fragment on his desk. "You spoke with Marsh?" he demanded. "I did." "And?" "His lies have polish," I said, "but they're still lies." Wolfe exhaled slowly. "Archie, tread cautiously. You are not invincible." "Tell that to Marsh," I said. He didn't smile. "I intend to." Fritz appeared at the doorway with a tray. "Coffee?" Wolfe nodded. I took a cup, leaned back and crossed my legs. "We're getting close," I told Wolfe. "Too close," he murmured. "And someone is watching the distance." Then he reached for the bell cord, decisive, signalling instructions to come. A sure sign that the next move would matter. If you ever want to ruin a peaceful afternoon at the brownstone, try answering the phone at 4:07 p.m. 3 minutes after orchid hours begin. That's when the bell rang, and I, being a man who values continued existence, sprinted from the office to catch it before Wolfe could even consider descending. I grabbed the receiver. Goodwin speaking. "Archie," Lon Cohen said, with the tone of a man calling to warn his neighbour that the barn is on fire and the horses have joined a union. "Hold on to something." "I'm standing," I said. "That enough?" "Not for this. Tomorrow's Gazette, front page, your boss is going to explode. Somebody leaked that Nero Wolfe interfered in the Renlow investigation. Headlines already set in cold type. Famed Detective Block's police inquest." If I'd been holding a glass, it would have shattered. Who the hell fed that garbage? Anonymous insider claiming Wolfe withheld evidence and coached a witness. That's absurd. I know it's absurd. Wolfe knows it's absurd, but absurdity sells papers. Who's pushing it? I demanded. Marsh? Sylvia Dane? One of the Barton and Phelps choir members? Lon sighed. I can't name a source. But Archie, this story didn't come from the street. It came from polished floors. Publishing. Again. Thanks, Lon, I said. I'll break the news to His Majesty. You do that. And Archie, tell him I'll print a correction if he gives me something solid. I hung up and stood for a second, listening to the quiet hum of the elevator shaft upstairs, where Wolfe tended his orchids. Delivering bad news during orchid hours is a delicate art, like juggling knives in a minefield. But this wasn't something I could postpone. I stepped to the elevator and pressed the call button. Wolfe emerged 30 seconds later, filling the doorway like a disgruntled monarch. Archie, he said sharply, what emergency impels you to violate the sanctity of... A bomb in the Gazette, I said. He froze. Explain. I did, quickly, concisely. Wolfe listened, his features tightening not with rage, but with precision, as though aligning each insult on an internal shelf. When I finished, he pressed his fingertips together. So, he said coldly, someone intends to malign me. Seems so. And by extension, malign this household. Present company included. His nostrils flared. Phooey, come. He moved to the office with surprising speed for a man who preferred stillness to movement. Once seated, he rang the bell cord. Fritz appeared, worried. Black coffee, Wolfe said, and bring Mr. Goodwin ginger ale. That was Wolfian protectiveness, subtle, disguised, but real. When Fritz left, Wolfe pointed at my desk. Prepare to take dictation. I sat, rolled paper into the machine and rested my fingers on the keys. Wolfe inhaled deeply. Then, with the calm of a surgeon picking a scalpel, he began. To the editors of the New York Gazette, the report alleging that I, Nero Wolfe, obstructed a police investigation is wholly fictitious. I have provided all relevant information to Inspector Kramer and his staff in the correct form and at the correct time. Any suggestion otherwise is an affront not merely to myself, but to the standards of your paper. He continued for 7 minutes, each sentence a carefully sharpened blade. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. The words cut without volume. When he finished, I removed the final page and placed it on his desk. Shall I call Lon? I asked. Not yet. He leaned back. We must confirm one factual element before proceeding. The phone rang. Wolfe frowned. Answer it. I did. Goodwin. Saul Pantzer's voice steady as a metronome. Archie, I have something. Lay it on me. You asked about Lawrence Wyke. Turns out he's alive. I blinked. Alive or author alive? Alive, Saul said, living under the name Walter Rickin. Works as a proofreader at Barton and Phelps. Looks like he's been hiding. Real hiding. Changed his name legally, moved apartments twice, lived quiet. Because of the stolen manuscript scandal, I asked. Exactly. Someone framed him years ago, then pushed him out. Saul paused. Julian Renlow must have found his old contract. Maybe tried to help him. Maybe that's why he got killed. I sighed. Saul, this case is turning into a hall of mirrors. Then look closely, Saul said. You might spot the real face. I'll tell Wolfe. And Archie? Yeah? Be careful. If Wyke's alive, someone had a reason to bury his legacy. He hung up. I relayed the revelation to Wolfe. His brow twitched once, his equivalent of leaping to his feet. Alive, he murmured. The vanished author, alive. Under another name, I said, working as a ghost in his own building. Wolfe sat up straighter. That alters matters immensely. Before I could respond, the phone rang again. Wolfe gestured irritably for me to take it. Goodwin. Kramer's voice came through like gravel poured from a bucket. Archie, tell Wolfe I'm calling in that favour. What favour? The one he pretends he didn't give. I need him to verify that he didn't obstruct this investigation. You mean confirm to the press? No, Kramer snapped. To the commissioner. Someone stirring political manure with a long stick. I need Wolfe to tell the commissioner that he's cooperating with us, not blocking. I blinked. This is new. Kramer sighed, a tired human sound, not his usual bark. Goodwin, I don't like owing Wolfe anything, but I'll take a bruise to keep this case clean. That was respect, even if it dripped with reluctance. I'll tell him. See that you do. He hung up. I repeated the conversation. Wolfe grunted. Inspector Kramer displays unexpected integrity. He usually does, I said. You just don't like the packaging. Wolfe shot me a glare sharp enough to cut upholstery. Archie. Yes? You will cease putting yourself in the gun's path. I blinked. Sir? You are too quick to confront suspects alone, and too slow to retreat. I dislike such vulnerabilities. That sounds like affection wrapped in barbed wire. It is a command, Wolfe growled. Obey it. Fritz returned with the coffee and ginger ale. As he set the tray down, Wolfe's gaze softened a fraction, not at Fritz, but at me. He didn't say it, but I knew. 2 men were dead, and he did not fancy a third. I sipped my ginger ale. We need to meet Walter Ricken. Yes, Wolfe said, but not today. Tonight we prepare. Tomorrow we summon. That'll be fun, I said. A missing author resurrected in the brownstone. He scowled. Do not indulge in melodrama. A knock rattled the front door. I rose. That will be the press, Wolfe said bitterly. Or a fool. I went to answer. Instead of a reporter, I found a small envelope on the vestibule floor. No footsteps, no shadow, no messenger. Just the envelope. I brought it in, handed it to Wolfe, and he slit it open with the precision of a man performing taxonomy on dangerous insects. Inside was a single line typed, "Stop digging or you'll join the dead." No signature, no flourish, just threat. Wolfe's face did not change, but the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Archie, he said quietly, type another notice. What kind? A response. I sat, fingers ready. He dictated slowly, to the anonymous coward, I do not respond to ultimatums, but I accept challenges. Regards, Nero Wolfe. I typed it, tore it out, and handed it over. Wolfe folded his hands. Deliver this to Mr. Cohen. He will print it. You're responding? I am clarifying, Wolfe said. My reputation is not a toy. He rose, rare, deliberate, imposing. And now, he said, I require solitude. I will go to the plant rooms. You, Archie, will eat dinner. Then you will sleep. Tomorrow will be consequential. He stepped into the elevator and ascended. I sat in the quiet office, staring at the threat note's cold simplicity. Then I muttered to myself, well, stranger in my chair, you sure left us one hell of a manuscript. And I turned off the lights. The cracked hallway light outside Walter Ricken's apartment flickered the way guilty men blink when you ask the right question. And at 6:12 p.m., I stood there wondering if I'd find a reclusive proofreader or a ghost in suspenders. The brass number on the door hung crooked, the paint peeled in strips, and somebody had scrawled a phone number with the promise, "Call for a good time," beneath it. In that building, I doubted it. I knocked. Silence stretched, taut as a pulled thread. Then the door creaked open 3 inches, revealing a narrow eye framed by anxiety. Yes? The voice was thin, cautious. Walter Ricken, I said. Or do you prefer Lawrence Wyke? The eye widened and the chain rattled. Who are you? Archie Goodwin. I work for Nero Wolfe. He froze like I'd just announced I was the IRS, and the landlord rolled into one. After a beat, the chain slid free and the door opened fully. Ricken was thin enough to fold into a manuscript envelope. His shoulders sloped forward with years of guilt or proofreading, or both. His hair needed a comb, his spectacles needed straightening, and his apartment needed divine intervention. You'd better come in, he murmured. I stepped inside. The place smelled of ink, old coffee, and missed meals, Papers formed small mountains on every surface. A typewriter sat on a scarred table like a defeated soldier. A single bare bulb hung overhead, casting shadows that looked more honest than the man who lived among them. Rickon folded his hands. "I suppose you already know." "Some of it," I said. "Why don't you fill in the blank pages?" He flinched at the metaphor. A real writer always does. "Halbert Quill. He found me," Rickon whispered. "Years ago. When the scandal hit, I ran. I changed my name. I thought I could start over. But Quill tracked me down, told me the firm still technically owned rights to anything I'd left behind. He said if I didn't want my past dragged into daylight, I'd sign a few papers to keep everything orderly." "Rights transfers," I said. Rickon nodded. "Forged ones. Transfers I didn't agree to. Contracts moving ownership to. I don't know where. I only know he kept making me sign." "And Julian Renlow?" Rickon swallowed hard. "He was kind, quiet, not like the others. He came across one of my old manuscripts in the archives, a real one, not the butchered version Quill forced me to sign away. He noticed the discrepancy." "What discrepancy?" Rickon fumbled in a drawer and pulled out a sheet of onion skin paper, covered in careful longhand. "Here, my writing. The original manuscript survived. Someone kept it, hid it. But the contract Quill made me sign said it was lost." I scanned the sheet. Beautiful sentences, flowing, alive, a man's voice. "Renlow realized the forgeries," Rickon said. "He said he wanted to help me, clear my name." "And then he turned up in Wolfe's office," I recalled, "and later, dead in an archive room." Rickon sagged onto the couch. "I didn't kill him. I swear I didn't. I didn't kill Quill either." "Someone did," I said. "And whoever did is using your signature like a keyring." Rickon trembled. "They'll come for me next." "Probably," I said cheerfully. "But you'll be with Wolfe, so they'll need a tank." His lips twitched with a ghost of humour. "I heard he's formidable." "That's the polite word. The impolite word is immovable." I paced the room, letting my eyes wander. A red herring presented itself in the form of a coat thrown over a chair, an expensive one, the kind a publishing exec might wear. For a second I wondered if Marsh had been here. Then I realized it was dated, frayed, and smelled faintly of mothballs. Not Marsh's style, not Sylvia's either. A genuine mislead. "Rickon," I said, "you mentioned inconsistencies. Did Julian show you anything?" "Yes." He rifled through a stack and produced a small, torn contract fragment. Not the one Wolfe had, but another corner. Different edge. "This," I took it. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "Handwriting." He leaned close and pointed. "See the marginal note? That's Dorian Marsh's hand." I felt a cold spool unwind in my spine. Marsh, the smooth editor with the too clean desk and the Wolfe coaster stain. He'd been lying from the start. "You're sure?" I asked. "Positive. I knew Marsh before I disappeared. He always annotated in the margins. Overconfident flourish to the D, a strange upward slant. That's his." That cinched it. Marsh had handled Wyke's contract at some point. I folded the paper and pocketed it. "We're going now." Rickon stared at me. "Where?" "To Wolfe. He wants you protected." "But no buts," I said. "You'll be safer with us than here, where the wallpaper is older than sin and twice as forgiving." Rickon hesitated. "Someone followed me yesterday." "Someone's been following you for 5 years. Come on." He grabbed a coat. We stepped into the hallway. I scanned both directions. No movement, but the air felt taut. Somebody had been shadowing Rickon, and if they had half a brain, they'd guessed I'd come calling. Outside, the streetlights flickered to life, throwing long shadows across the cracked pavement. Rickon clutched his collar against the cold. "Stick close," I said. We reached my car, Wolfe's Heron coupe, parked half a block down. As we crossed, a sedan rolled slowly from a curb, its engine humming like a lazy predator. Rickon froze. That's the one that followed me yesterday." "Good," I said. "I hate coincidences." We got into the Heron. The sedan pulled forward another 10 feet. Its headlights stayed low, almost polite. Polite men kill quietly. Rickon buckled in with trembling fingers. "They're waiting." "Then let's not disappoint them." I started the engine. The Heron whispered to life, smooth as Fritz's strudel. I eased into the street, watching the sedan in the rear mirror. It followed at a casual distance, the kind amateurs think is subtle. "Hold on," I told Rickon, who didn't need convincing. At the corner, I cut hard left, then gunned it. The heron leapt forward. The sedan tried to follow, but I threaded between two cabs, took a quick right, and barreled down a street with enough potholes to dislodge teeth. "Are you trying to kill us?" Rickon squeaked. "No," I said. "I'm trying to kill their enthusiasm." Another fast turn, a dip under an elevated track, and then a detour through an alley so narrow it made the heron tuck its mirrors in out of fear. The sedan hesitated at the entrance, too big to follow. I shot out the other end, took a side street, and circled back toward 9th Avenue. "Lost them," I said. Rickon sagged back, eyes wide behind his crooked glasses. "Mr. Goodwin, how do you do that?" "Practice," I said, "and good reflexes, and sheer terror." By the time we reached West 35th Street, Rickon had regained some composure. I parked out front and escorted him inside. Fritz opened the door, on time, stately, as if he'd expected us. "Good evening, Mr. Goodwin," he said. "Mr. Wolfe is in the office." "Rickon first," I said. "Put him somewhere safe." Fritz nodded and guided our guest toward the front room. I entered the office. Wolfe sat behind his desk, looking like a man prepared to sentence an encyclopedia to death. He eyed me, then the absence of danger, then the scrap of paper I held. "Well," he demanded. "We found our ghost," I said. "Lawrence Wyke is Walter Rickon, and he's got details." Wolfe motioned sharply. "Report." I did. Everything Rickon told me, the forged transfers, the blackmail, Renlow's sympathy, the existence of the real manuscript. When I finished, I placed the contract fragment on the desk. Wolfe picked it up delicately. "Handwriting," he muttered. "Yes, I see. Rickon says it's Marsh's." "Of course it is," Wolfe said. I had suspected, but needed verification. "And now?" "Now we prepare for the reckoning." He rang the bell cord. "Fritz!" Fritz appeared. "Yes, sir?" "Keep our guest fed. He will remain under this roof." "Yes, sir." Wolfe leaned back, fingers steepled. "Archie." "Yeah?" "You handled that tale with unnecessary bravado." "Thanks. That was not a compliment. You will not endanger yourself again." "That sounds familiar," I said. "Because you persist in ignoring it." He glowered. "Archie, I require you alive." "Same here," I said lightly, but the warmth behind his words settled in me. He shifted his weight. "Tomorrow morning, summon all principals. We will resolve this." "Midday?" "Not during orchid hours," he snapped. "Perish the thought." Outside the office, the house settled into its evening rhythm. Night pressed against the windows. Wolfe studied the fragment again, expression unreadable, mind running like a printing press churning toward the final page. Then he said softly, "Someone has written falsehoods over another man's life. Tomorrow, we erase them." And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the closest Nero Wolfe ever came to sounding like an avenging angel. By 10 minutes to noon the next day, the brownstone looked less like a respectable residence and more like the world's grumpiest literary salon. Chairs were arranged in neat arcs, the air smelled faintly of Fritz's polish, and Wolfe sat behind his desk like a mountain preparing to hold a Senate hearing. I took a moment to admire the setup. If Wolfe ever got tired of detection, he could have run society like a particularly eloquent monarch. I leaned against my desk and surveyed the crowd as they trickled in. Sylvia Dane first, gliding into the office with her tragic heroine posture, Miriam Fay next, wringing her hands as if wringing the truth out of them, Walter Rickon hovering near the wall like a nervous footnote, and Saul Pantzer, calm in his flat cap, planting himself wherever the least nonsense was likely to land. Kramer arrived dead last, of course, at 11:58, stepping inside with the expression of a man forced to judge a pie-eating contest between amateurs. "Goodwin," he grunted, "if this turns into theatre—" "It's Wolfe," I said. "It already is." He gave me a side-eye that carried a week's worth of protest, then moved to the corner to stand sentinel with Pearly Stebbins behind him, like a bulldog warming up for obedience class. At 12 o'clock sharp, Wolfe pressed his fingertips together. "We will begin." Sylvia shifted, crossed her legs elegantly, and gave Wolfe the kind of smile she usually reserved for book reviewers who could be bribed with flattery. "Mr. Wolfe, I hope this won't take long. I'm due at a luncheon." "You are due here," Wolfe said. "Your luncheon can wait. Mr. Goodwin, Close the door. I did, enjoying the subtle ripple of discomfort it produced. A captive audience always listens better. Wolfe began slowly, as was his custom when he intended to trap his prey with silk rather than rope. 2 men are dead, Julian Renlow and Halbert Quill. The circumstances, though distinct, share a common point of origin, a forged set of rights transfers concerning the work of Lawrence Wyke. Sylvia flinched. Miriam bit her lip. Rickon looked like he wanted to dissolve into vapour. "I will start," Wolfe said, "by eliminating irrelevancies." He fixed Sylvia with a look that could have wilted a proud orchid. "Miss Dane, your broken fountain pen." She blinked. "What about it?" "It was stained with verification ink, not manuscript ink. You were verifying signatures, not forging them." She relaxed a fraction. "Yes, Dorian Marsh asked me to check a few pages for consistency. I didn't—" She stopped, suddenly aware she'd given more than she intended. Wolfe cut her off with a curt wave. "Your involvement in verification is noted, but forgery requires a different hand." His gaze slid toward Miriam. "As for you, Miss Fay—" She startled like a rabbit noticing a shadow. I've told you everything. Sylvia manipulated Julian. Everyone knew." "That is false," Wolfe said, "and worse, petty. Your accusations stem from jealousy, not evidence." A tear glimmered in Miriam's eye. "Jealousy? I wasn't—" "Miss Fay," Wolfe said, "your affections for Mr. Renlow were neither subtle nor reciprocated. This is natural, but irrelevant." She lowered her gaze, defeated. Kramer grunted under his breath. I heard it. Wolfe did too. Wolfe continued. "Mr. Rickon." Walter stepped forward an inch, trembling. "Yes, sir." "You are not a murderer. Your confession, though halting, clarifies more than it conceals. Mr. Quill blackmailed you. You complied. You feared exposure." Wolfe gestured toward Saul. "Mr. Pantzer verified your employment history and your movements. You are innocent of the homicides." Rickon exhaled as if purging 5 years of dread. Kramer muttered, "Good." I glanced at him. "You enjoying the show?" "Just waiting for the part where someone swings," he said. I grinned. "Stick around." Wolfe resumed. "Now we address the mechanism of the crimes. The archives logs show Julian Renlow's ID card was used after he was dead. Only one individual possessed access to all personnel cards, and the authority to request replacements without scrutiny." Sylvia stiffened. Miriam blinked. Rickon paled. "Dorian Marsh," Wolfe said, voice like a gavel falling. I added, "And Marsh is conveniently absent today." Kramer shifted, jaw tight. "Wolfe, you better have more than innuendo." "Oh, I do." Wolfe lifted the torn contract fragment, the one that had begun this bizarre odyssey when Julian Renlow left it in Archie's chair. "This fragment contains a watermark, not from finalized contracts, not from print room drafts. It is a watermark unique to internal editorial copies." He paused to let that sink in. Only editors handled such drafts, and only one editor's handwriting appears on this fragment, identified by Mr. Rickon's expert familiarity. Rickon nodded quickly. "Yes, Marsh always made that flourish on his Ds." Wolfe nodded. Thus Marsh not only handled Wyke's manuscript and Renlow's discovery, he orchestrated the forgeries, blackmailed Mr. Rickon through Mr. Quill, and silenced both Renlow and Quill when their usefulness ended. The room went dead quiet except for the faint hum of irritation radiating from Kramer. Finally Kramer grumbled, "You're saying Marsh killed them both?" "Yes," Wolfe said calmly, "and used publishing mechanics, access cards, staged ink, and contract fragments to hide his involvement." Sylvia whispered, "Dorian? But he's meticulous, controlled." "Control breeds confidence," Wolfe said, "and confidence, when corrupt, breeds murder." Saul stepped forward. "Inspector, he's right. Marsh had motive, access, and the handwriting connection." Kramer rubbed his forehead like an old engine coughing back to life. "Wolfe, I hate to admit this." I leaned close. "Go on, Inspector, it won't kill you." He shot me a glare, then sighed. "This lines up. Damn it, it lines up." Wolfe inclined his head. "Thank you." Kramer turned to Stebbins. "Pearlie, go downstairs. Call for Marsh to be brought in. Don't tell him it's an arrest, just a clarification." Stebbins grunted and left. Wolfe leaned back, satisfied. We will end this charade soon. Sylvia rose, pacing. I never trusted Dorian. Too charming, too sure of himself. That's not a crime, Miriam muttered. No, I said, but stabbing your co-workers is. Rickon murmured. Why did he keep my manuscript? Why not destroy it? Wolfe answered gently. Trophies. Marsh wished to possess what he could not create. That one hit the room like dropped ink on a blank page, bleeding, spreading. I cleared my throat. Ladies and gentlemen, if you need reserved seating for the finale, please let me know. We're starting to run out of chairs. Kramer snorted, amused despite himself. Wolfe ignored me. We await Mr. Marsh. Mr. Goodwin, attend the door. I want no surprises. Yes, sir. As I moved to the hallway, I thought, this was classic pre-showdown Wolfe, the calm before the avalanche. All clues laid, all suspects trembling, all eyes fixed on the door where the final piece of the puzzle would soon walk in, smug and unsuspecting. From upstairs, the elevator cables rattled softly, either Theodore tending the orchids or simply the house shifting. The air felt charged, waiting. Behind me, Wolfe said, Archie, when Marsh arrives, seat him directly before me. Front row seat, I said. Nice of you to offer him the best view before you drop him down an intellectual mineshaft. He will descend himself, Wolfe murmured. I merely provide the gravity. Kramer scratched his jaw. Just make it clean, Wolfe. I always do, Wolfe replied. I stood by the door, listening for footsteps on the stoop. The next beat in this story was already marching toward us, and I had the distinct feeling Marsh wouldn't appreciate his starring role. But when Wolfe tightens a net, there's never any escape, only an exit. And Marsh was about to take his. If theatrical finales had an official address in Manhattan, it would have been the brownstone office at 3:01 p.m. that afternoon. By then, all the suspects had assembled in a semicircle of chairs that made the place look like the world's most uncomfortable book club. Sylvia Dane perched elegantly as if expecting applause, Miriam Fay twisting her handkerchief into abstract sculpture, Walter Rickon shrinking into himself like he was hoping to vanish between the floorboards, and Saul Panzer leaning against a wall with the kind of stillness that unnerves liars. Kramer stood near the door, arms folded, jaw grinding, while Pearlie Stebbins positioned himself like a human blockade. The only empty chair was the one reserved, symbolically and ominously, for Dorian Marsh. Wolfe sat behind his desk, not merely seated, but enthroned, with his fingertips pressed together, his eyes half-lidded, and his demeanour suggesting he had already solved the problem, but would indulge us with the recital. I took my usual place near my desk, ready to perform whatever handoff or document flourish Wolfe required. At 3:03, I heard the front door open. Fritz announced the final guest, Mr. Dorian Marsh. Marsh entered with the confidence of a man who thought he had weathered the worst storm and was now stepping into a drizzle. When he saw the audience, that confidence dipped a fraction, enough to satisfy me for the next 2 weeks. Mr. Marsh, Wolfe said without rising, please be seated. Marsh sat, adjusting his cuffs with practiced calm. This looks terribly formal. It is, Wolfe replied. We are concluding a matter. Good, Marsh said. Inspector Kramer, I'm willing to cooperate fully. Kramer grunted. You'd better. Wolfe let the silence settle long enough to force everyone to acknowledge its weight. Only then did he speak again. 2 men are dead, he began. Julian Renlow, a junior accountant, and Halbert Quill, contracts manager. Their murders share a single architect, their motives share a single origin, and the evidence leading to the truth is now complete. Sylvia inhaled sharply. Miriam froze. Rickon's foot tapped in a worried rhythm. Marsh maintained his smile, but his fingers twitched once, barely there, but enough to tell me his nerves were tapping their own Morse code. Wolfe gestured toward me. I stepped forward and handed him the torn contract fragment. He held it delicately. This, Wolfe said, is the seed from which the entire sordid tree grew. Marsh's smile thinned. A scrap of paper? A scrap, Wolfe said, bearing a watermark used only for internal editorial drafts, not final contracts. Such drafts are handled exclusively by editors, and the handwriting in the margin has been identified as yours. Marsh blinked, then forced a laugh. Surely you don't believe. Be silent, Wolfe said in a voice that could have frozen volcanic lava. Marsh closed his mouth. Let us proceed, Wolfe said coolly. Years ago, Lawrence Wyke, now Mr. Walter Ricken, was coerced into signing a series of rights transfers. Those transfers were forged, manipulated, and funneled toward private beneficiaries. Mr. Quill facilitated the signatures. You, Mr. Marsh, orchestrated them. Ricken trembled violently. Sylvia covered her mouth. Miriam whispered something about knowing it, though she obviously hadn't. Marsh straightened. That's absurd. Quill threatened you, Wolfe said sharply. He intended to expose you when he realized the fraud had grown beyond simple exploitation. You killed him in his office, staged the ink spill, and placed the pen in his hand to resemble suicide. Marsh's jaw clenched. I did no such. Again, Wolfe said. Be silent. Kramer's eyes narrowed. Let him finish. Wolfe nodded once. Mr. Renlow discovered inconsistencies, particularly the existence of Mr. Ricken's original manuscript, which contradicted the forged rights you engineered. He sought assistance. He visited this house. Wolfe gestured toward Archie's chair, the one where Renlow had first appeared. Marsh glanced at it involuntarily. You followed him, Wolfe continued. When he fled our office in panic, you intercepted him. Later you lured him to the archives, killed him, and used his ID card to fabricate his check-in time and frame the scene. Marsh swallowed but said nothing. Your attempt to plant suspicion elsewhere was clumsy, Wolfe said. You broke Miss Dane's pen and left it out like bait. You encouraged Miss Fay's jealousy to blossom into accusation. You relied on Mr. Ricken's fear to keep him hidden. But you underestimated two things, Mr. Goodwin's persistence and the fact that truth, unlike fiction, does not tolerate revision by unskilled hands. I gave Wolfe a silent nod of appreciation for that line. If he'd wanted to, he could have had a secondary career skewering editors for sport. Marsh's silence had turned brittle. I'd seen marble statues look livelier. Finally he spoke, voice low. You're spinning conjecture. No, Wolfe said sharply. Conjecture is wind. This is fact. He placed the contract fragment on the desk. This came from your personal copy, your marked annotated draft. A draft you hid. A draft you tore when Renlow discovered it. Wolfe leaned forward. Mr. Pantzer confirmed the printing history. Mr. Ricken identified the handwriting. The archives logs confirm the misuse of Renlow's ID. Inspector Kramer confirmed the timing. And Mr. Goodwin, he gestured at me, confirmed your presence at this brownstone days before you admitted to any involvement. Marsh's composure finally cracked. None of that proves— Yes, it does, Wolfe said. Because the fraud did not end with rights transfers. You intended to resurrect Wyke's manuscripts under different names, to sell them, profit from them, and bury the original author permanently. But Renlow stumbled upon your plan, and Quill, realizing you had become reckless, tried to distance himself. You removed them both. Silence swelled like a tide. Even Stebbins looked impressed. Wolfe sat back. Your crimes were calculated, cold, self-serving, but predictable. Marsh stood abruptly. This is outrageous. You're accusing me based on speculation and slander. For God's sake, Marsh, Kramer snapped, sit down before I put you down. Marsh froze, his throat working like he'd swallowed a live wire. Kramer stepped forward. Wolfe, you're certain? I would not waste my breath otherwise. Kramer nodded once, slowly. The gesture carried more weight than any shout. He turned to Marsh. Dorian Marsh, you're under arrest for the murders of Julian Renlow and Halbert Quill. Pearly. Stebbins moved, swift and deliberate. Marsh stiffened, eyes wide, but didn't resist. Pearly cuffed him and guided him toward the door. Sylvia looked pale. Miriam was crying quietly. Ricken closed his eyes in something like relief or mourning. When the door shut behind Marsh and his escort, Wolfe exhaled, long and slow, like he'd just pruned the world's ugliest orchid. Kramer lingered. Wolfe, that was solid work. He looked like each word cost him a nickel. I'll file the report accordingly. Thank you, Inspector, Wolfe said, and though his voice remained cool, I knew he meant it. Kramer headed out with a final grunt. All right, Wolfe, I'll wait for your report. When we were finally alone, Sylvia, Miriam, Ricken, Saul and me still present, Wolfe raised a hand. You may all go, he said simply. Fritz opened the door with perfect timing, ushering them out. One by one they left. Saul gave me a nod. I returned it. When the door closed, Wolfe looked at me. "Archie," he said. "Yes, sir?" "You performed with persistent celerity." His voice softened a fraction. "Commendably." Now, Wolfe had complimented me perhaps 4 times in my life, and never with 2 words in a row that fancy. I kept my expression neutral, but my ego performed cartwheels behind my ribs. "Thank you," I said casually, as if I hadn't waited my entire career to hear that exact phrasing. He rang the bell cord. Fritz arrived. "Beer," Wolfe said, "for both of us." Fritz disappeared. Wolfe settled back in his chair. This case was intolerably messy. Violence, forgery, theft. He glanced at my desk. "Clean that chair, Archie. I dislike ghosts." "Already planned on it," I said, grinning. "But first, I'm stepping out for some air." "Return in 20 minutes, Wolfe said. "The beer must not be wasted." I wouldn't dream of it. When I stepped outside into the early evening chill, I breathed deep, letting the Manhattan air wash the dust of murder and manuscripts off my lungs. Another case closed. Another killer caught. Another rare Wolfe compliment secured. Not a bad day's work.